What I have. So this began last night. We had a call about 9:43 p.m. to a gas station, the 7100 block of West 41st Street for a shooting. Once, I'll just kind of go through this in sequential order, but this began a little bit earlier than that. We had a 23-year-old man that said he was jumped by some people near the 600 block of North Daisy Avenue. He didn't have a lot of information. There was no report that was made to police on that. And then he had heard from somebody that the people responsible for that assault were near 41st Street and Sertoma Avenue. We had a 44-year-old man, a 23-year-old man. He was the victim in that assault case. And then a 14-year-old boy drove to that area. There was a 42-year-old woman that followed behind in a separate car. Once they got to 41st Street in Sertoma, there was a group of motorcyclists that were parked in the lot. They confronted them. So the three males got out of that vehicle. All three of them had bats, and they were confronting the motorcyclists. They believed at that time that they were the ones that were responsible for that initial assault. At some point, the 23-year-old man swung a baseball bat at the head of a 26-year-old motorcyclist. The 26-year-old motorcyclist had a handgun. He ended up shooting that gun and struck the 23-year-old man. This all happened basically right about the same time. So right after that happened, the motorcyclist then noticed that the woman was pointing a gun at him. He fired at that woman. She was struck in the arm, and then almost immediately after that, the 44-year-old man swung a bat at the head of the motorcyclist. He then pointed the gun, fired the gun at the 44-year-old and struck him several times. The 23-year-old was pronounced deceased on scene. The 44-year-old was taken to the hospital and later died at the hospital. The 42-year-old woman was taken to the hospital, treated, and then released. There was a warrant that was just issued for her. That was for 3 counts of aggravated assault, and those are basically alternate counts. I can give you her name. Last is Martinez, M-A-R-T-I-N-E-Z. First is D-A-R-I-N-D-A. Middle is J-A-N-E-T-T-E. She's 42 from Sioux Falls. Like I said, we're not going to give the names of the deceased yet to give family a chance to notify relatives of that. So one of the things that came about during this investigation after the shooting is that we learned that that group of motorcyclists was not responsible for that assault. They were actually on a different part of Sioux Falls when that took place, and we have that confirmed with different cameras. And so we know it was basically a case of mistaken identity. They thought it was a different group, which it wasn't. At this point, the 26-year-old motorcyclist has not been arrested or charged with anything. Once the investigation is done, the state's attorney's office will review that to determine if there's any charges, but he was cooperative with this investigation and remained on scene. I think that's it. I can try to answer questions if you have any.
So, can you tell me the 2 deceased, they were both in the same vehicle?
Yeah, so the 44-year-old man, the 23-year-old man, and the 14-year-old, they were all in the vehicle. All of them, once they arrived in the lot, had baseball bats. The 14-year-old ended up going back to the vehicle before any of this happened, so he initially got out, but then went back to the vehicle, so he was not involved in any of the shooting. But both the 44-year-old and the 23-year-old still had the bats with them.
Okay, so I was at the scene, and I'm wondering, are those the people that were in there was an Escalade or a Suburban there?
Yeah, they arrived in the Escalade, and then the woman basically arrived. She was following behind in a different vehicle, but she arrived at essentially the same time.
Okay, there was a lot of talk going on at the scene that the woman was potentially the driver of the Audi.
I don't know, it was a car, but yeah, she drove a vehicle, a car that followed the SUV.
There was also a vehicle crash shortly after.
So that crash was unrelated. while they were investigating the shooting, the crash happened. It was a driver had a medical event, and then I think he lost consciousness for a period of time, and then there was a head-on collision. He was taken to the hospital. He's still in the hospital, but no serious injuries from that. The injuries he sustained were from that medical event before the crash.
So it wasn't like they saw what was happening.
No,
Yes.
no, that was it. Just really a coincidence of the time and place that happened, but that had nothing to do with the shooting that took place.
Yeah, I just think I want to make that very clear. So there was a lot of talk over there at the scene too, that he had maybe potentially witnessed the ordeal at the gas station and had a heart attack as a result.
The car crash was completely separate from the shooting. The driver of that vehicle had a medical event before the crash, but it was unrelated to the shooting.
What about the other car that he hit head on? What happened with that driver?
I don't. Let me see if I can find. I don't think there was any serious injuries with that one. Let me just double check. I didn't hear of any other serious injuries, so, but let me just confirm that.
And he's still in the hospital?
Yes, the
Related to-
driver of that car.
Yeah,
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 he's still
the
in
driver, so due to the medical.
Just said the other driver had minor injuries, but would seek medical attention on their own. So it doesn't list what those specific injuries were. And that happened a little after 10, about 10:15 p.m.
Back to the shooting, do we know how many gunshots were fired or how many weapons were involved?
The woman had a handgun, and then the one motorcyclist had a handgun. I don't have the number of shots that were fired, but we believe it was just those two guns were used.
Was this like for the motorcyclist? Was it at all like an act of like self-defense? Do they know or?
Well, that's one of the things that the state's attorney's office will review. Certainly there's laws in South Dakota that provide for self-defense in different situations. We always encourage people to try to get themselves out of the situation. Sorry, that ambulance washer came out. Is that showing out or hearing? You guys hearing that or not?
It's not too bad.
Okay. So there are laws in South Dakota that allow for self-defense, and we encourage people to get themselves out of those situations if possible. One of the things that's important to note that even if you're in a situation like that, this is going to be looked at. So police are going to look at it. Once we're done with the investigation, the state's attorney's office is going to review that as well. So just because there's allowances in state law for self-defense doesn't mean that there couldn't be some charges. And so I just want to make that clear. Certainly this seems to be a case on the surface of a self-defense where somebody's swinging a baseball bat, which could be considered a dangerous weapon or a deadly weapon, and he was defending himself, but that'll be a determination that's made by the state's attorney's office once the investigation is complete.
Were the three people, was there any relation like between like the people that were?
Yeah, so the three that were in the SUV, they are all related, as well as the woman, Miss Martinez. So all four of them are related. I'm not going to go into the specific relationships, but all four of them are related.
I also heard on the scene that there was potentially some sort of minor involved in the incident. Can you tell me anything about the extent of how that minor was involved?
Well, the 14-year-old, there was a few minors that were on scene. I don't know exact ages. I don't know how many, but I know there was at least two of them. The 14-year-old left the SUV with the baseball bat, but then later returned to that. So he didn't have any, outside of that, didn't have any other involvement. There was another juvenile that was a witness. I didn't hear of any other juveniles involved, but there certainly could have been others. But This was essentially an incident between the four people, the motorcyclist with the gun, and then the other three, the woman and then the two men that died.
Does the public have any like need to like worry, or like is there any concern for public safety at this point?
No, I would say no, there's not really a concern for public safety. You know, this is a very unusual event just in the way that things unfolded. But this began with an assault, and we don't have information around that assault or what happened to that. But these people thought that they were confronting the person or persons responsible for that initial assault. So it was really, they misidentified the suspects. That's really what kicked off this event, this shooting that happened.
So when you say misidentified, the motorcyclists misidentified the SUV folks?
The people in the SUV confronted that group of motorcyclists because they thought that group of motorcyclists were responsible for the initial assault of the 23-year-old, but that information was not correct. And so I think there are some more details in the affidavit that may kind of explain that, but that's the easiest way to say that, is the people in the SUV thought that group of motorcyclists were responsible, but it turns out they were not. They did not have any involvement, and we were able to confirm that they were in a whole other part of Sioux Falls when that assault took place.
So why approach them?
That's a good question. I don't have answers to that.
So did the assault take place at a business or did it take place at a residence?
The initial assault took place near the 600 block of North Daisy Avenue. And like I said, that was not reported to police, so I don't have details on what happened with that assault.
So since that was not reported to police, then do you guys backtrack on that and investigate that now since it's tied to this incident?
The person that had information on that is the 23-year-old that is deceased, so we're unlikely to be able to get any other details of that. He returned to the home and made a comment that he had been jumped, but we don't have details on what that all entailed.
Okay, so the other team who was involved in the assault, we don't know who they are, or where they went, or?
Well, I don't know, are you talking about initial assault?
Right.
I don't know who was involved. We don't know ages of anybody that was involved. We don't know a number of people that were involved. The only information that we had was the 23-year-old came home. He had some noticeable injuries, I guess. I don't think there was probably anything that would have been deemed serious, but he made the comment that he had been jumped, but
And-
that was it.
And then all the folks in the SUV jumped in the SUV.
They received some information that the information they received was the people that were responsible for that assault, for jumping that victim, were near 41st Street in Sertoma. And that's when the three got into the SUV,
Okay.
and then Martinez got into the vehicle, and all four of them went to that area.
So essentially, if someone was at 41st and Sertoma who had participated in assault, we never found them.
That's,
The SUV folks
yes, yeah,
never found them.
yeah.
How many motorcyclists were there, remind us?
I don't know the exact number. There was
But-
several. You know, one of the things I didn't mention is this entire incident was captured on video. We actually had a few different types of video, but there was video at the business, and then there was some cell phone video that we have, and so that was, it really matched up with what everybody said happened. So there were several motorcyclists with that group. I don't know an exact number though.
And since it was
Maybe 8 to 10, something
misidentified,
like that.
the motorcyclists happened to have a gun on them and they were defending themselves, so to speak,
Yes,
even though they weren't aware. And there was only one motorcyclist with a gun.
that I don't know.
Okay.
One
who
I know
used a gun.
one person fired a gun. I don't know if any of the other people were armed or had weapons with them.
Thank you.
We had the one motorcyclist that fired the gun, and then we had the woman that pointed the gun at the motorcyclist. So we know those two guns were involved in this. I don't know if there was any other guns that were around or available.
And do we know if the guns that were used in the scene were like registered guns? They weren't stolen weapons? Do we
don't have
know
the
anything
registered
about
guns
that?
in South Dakota.
Oh,
The only thing we would check for is if a gun is stolen or not, or has been reported stolen. I didn't hear of anything, so I don't believe the guns were stolen, but you don't have to register guns in South Dakota.
Was there any sort of verbal interaction like between them before? Did they just kind of come out with the bats, like swinging at them?
No, there was, yeah, so they came out with the bats and they confronted them. There were different conversations that were taking place, and then it seemed like things were kind of calming down, and then that's when the 23-year-old swung the bat at the one motorcyclist. And so obviously that was the thing that kicked off everything else. But they got out of the vehicle with the bats, and then there was some, I suppose some talking. I don't know exactly what the nature of that conversation was though.
Do we know if any customers at the business got involved or were injured or were a part of?
No, there was, outside of the people that I talked about, there were no other injuries that were reported.
Okay, and all staff at the business were safe?
I don't know, I would imagine so.
And the woman that she pointed the gun, but she never fired as far as you're aware?
I'll just say that she pointed the gun at the motorcyclist, and then that's when he fired his gun. The affidavit should have some more details related to that.
Can you explain why the motorcycles were, it appeared they maybe could have been hit by a vehicle based on the way they were piled up when I was at the scene last night?
No vehicles, no motorcycles were hit by any vehicles. I think what happened is during this altercation, people ran into the motorcycles and they fell over. So there was no, outside of that fray, there was no impact any motorcycles. I think
No vehicles hit any
no
motorcycles
vehicles
during the
hit any
dispute?
motorcycles. So I think the motorcycles probably tipped over during the whole altercation and when everything happened.
Can you give an approximation on like how many people total were involved? Would you say 10, 20,
Well,
5, 10?
we have 4 people that were directly involved with the shooting. There were other motorcycles there, motorcyclists there, some riders, some operators. I don't have the exact number of how many people were there.
It seems there was an event going on at Roosevelt, either at the time or shortly before. Was Roosevelt notified, the police talking to them to ensure everyone was safe, that a shooting was happening across the street?
I don't know that specifically. I would doubt it because by the time police arrived, this event was basically over. We had officers that were providing life-saving measures to the 44-year-old. I think they were trying to provide life-saving measures to the 23-year-old as well. So the priority is saving people's lives and providing that care. But the people that were involved stayed there and shared information, and so we knew that there was not any outside threats to anybody. So I don't know specifically if that information was shared with the high school, but I doubt it.
Was there any indication why the 14-year-old went back into the car and like, wasn't involved further? Or just...
I don't, yeah, I don't know. It's pretty clear on the video that he gets out, but then he goes back by the car, so I don't know why he chose to do that.
Maybe it was told.
Anything else on
Do you
that?
have the CRI number for the affidavit?
I don't. They were just going to file that at the clerk's office, so I don't know if that has a clerk's case number yet, but I can check here in a minute. Anything else? Nothing else on the log. Everything else is basically reports.
Is there any update on the apartment building crash from?
No, I haven't heard of anything like whether we identified the driver or not.
Or the 3-year-old still in the hospital?
We don't get updates from the hospital after, we'll get that initial assessment when somebody is taken to the hospital, but after that, we don't get updates from the hospital, so I don't know the 3-year-old's condition, and I don't believe there's been any arrests that have been made.
Any updates on the homicides?
The other homicides, no, nothing new with that, nothing new with Mr. Weathersby.
So one more question, whomever fired shots has been arrested, those who survived, or just confirm that there
No,
is
so the
no
motorcyclist was not arrested. that this entire incident will be reviewed by the state's attorney's office.
Okay.
So the only arrest that we have is the woman that pointed the gun at the motorcycle. She was arrested and charged. The motorcyclist himself has not been